That counts. We've got your local. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Emily Cross, and I am a sophomore here at the University of Michigan. I am studying public health, and I am also a member of the Filipino American Student Association, also known as FASA. So it is my pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's special event that I helped organize on behalf of FASA in collaboration with FYLPRO and visiting professor and renowned historian, Professor Ocampo. Tonight, we will begin with an informational session about the Filipino Young Leaders Program, and then dive into a lecture by Professor Ocampo about the Philippines national hero, José Rizal, and then end the night with a Q&A and some time for socializing and networking. So a little bit about my history and work with FYLPRO. I was a part of their fellowship program last year, where I got to assist with TIO, a virtual resource that provided the Filipino community with culturally relevant information and navigating their way through the COVID-19 pandemic. I was not only able to develop my skills in creative writing, community building, and social media outreach, but I was introduced to a whole network of Filipino professionals in a variety of fields, anywhere from public health to social work to law to technology to medicine. I was able to speak at a White House event with COVID-19 response coordinator, Dr. Jha, about my work as a trial fellow coordinating vaccine clinics. In general, I'm so passionate about this organization and the work they do to provide young aspiring Filipino leaders and the work they do to provide them with people they can connect with, people that can offer them mentorship, because I think it is so important to see people who come from the same background as you, people that look like you in spaces that have been predominantly white in order to increase Filipino representation across all fronts. So with that said, thank you all for coming once again. I really encourage you to fully engage with our presenters tonight and most importantly, enjoy and have fun. I will now pass it off to Rizal, the president of FYLPRO, to talk a little bit more about the organization.
Thank you so much, Emily, and thank you to FASA for generously partnering up with us with this event and just your work in the community and here on campus. My name is Lisa Tinglao. I am the current president of FYLPRO, which is the Filipino Young Leaders Program. I'm also a co-founder and project director of TIO, which I will go over in a bit. But I am so excited to be able to, have this type of programming. This is something that we've always wanted to aspire to bring valuable insights about our culture. And that's what FYLPRO is all about. So this is our mission statement. FYLPRO is a network of high-performing next-generation leaders to advance the Philippines and the Filipino people through their advocacy and expertise in various industries. We continually expand the pipeline of Filipino young leaders in the diaspora. By connecting them to the motherland, we foster collaborative, multinational relationships that create innovation and support socioeconomic progress of the global Filipino community. In a bit, I will talk about the signature program of FYLPRO that I think what most people know us by is the immersion program. And by far, if you talk to any alumni, they will use the same words that I will use. It's life-changing, it's transformative, and it's really what keeps the fire burning about our culture and why we're all here and why, what we can do to leave an impact and legacy. In addition, I want to also shout out TIO, which started out as our COVID-19 response, which has transformed from just a virtual help desk to now we are pivoting to an innovative data hub that empowers the Philippine AO communities by collecting data, fostering partnerships, publishing culturally relevant insights, and developing leaders to create an equitable, sustainable future. So in the course of the creation of this project, it really came down to just trying to answer a question like during COVID-19. It's like, how can we be together without being together? And it was really what prompted all of us as young leaders, like we were stuck at home, we were seeing our elders and other folks sharing this information. And we just basically asked the question, what we can do, what can we do about it? So as a result of that, TIO was born, and it's, 3 years later, a small group of people still meet almost every week on this project. And we were able to launch the fellowship program that Emily was part of last summer, and continue to, offer these opportunities that you may not get in the spaces that you're in. And I would stress this is really kind of the power of FYLPRO being a multidisciplinary organization that's able to really come together in times of crisis, but also respond to a call that and fill in those gaps that are in the community and whatnot. And then just want to plug, as I mentioned before, the immersion program is our signature program. We started out with the first one in 2012, and it was a project, it was an idea from former Ambassador José Rizal. And since then, it's continued all the way through 2019, right before the pandemic. So I was part of that last batch that went. Then obviously during the pandemic, the last 2 years, we weren't able to travel. But luckily last year, we were able to restart the program. So this is for 25 to 45. We actually raised the age limit last year. So if you are in that range and you're a young professional and you are passionate about the community and bridging and strengthening the ties between the US and the Philippines. I encourage you to take a look at our program and apply. If you haven't already heard, we did extend the deadline to this Friday, so I don't know, maybe you have a couple days if you haven't heard and wanted to give it a try. I encourage you to check it out, but if not, there's always next year. And then also beyond, I think 2021, 2020 was really a banner year for us too, beyond just the immersion program. We also launched other things like we are partners with the US Asia Institute. We are their professional mentors to the folks that are part of the Impact program, which is a program for Filipino Americans. So for those that are still in school, this is primarily for college students. So if you have not heard about this program, I encourage you to take a look at it. It happens every summer. I think it runs for 8 weeks. And our involvement there is that we become the mentors of this cohort that gets chosen. And then lastly, Tayo, as Emily said, she was part of the last cohort. We opened the application for our 4th cohort. So this is currently open till the end of the month. And this year's focus is going to be a little different. We are focusing, and this is open to not just students, by the way. So if anybody's interested in helping out with this year's focus, which is how do we have difficult conversations with our family, with our friends, everything from like public health to politics. So the deliverable, what we're trying to achieve this summer is creating a playbook and making sure we have kind of a guide of like, how do you navigate these spaces when you're trying to, talk to your loved ones about certain things. And then I think that's it. So these follow us on social, on the website. You can email Sarah, so that's FYLPRO, and then also Tayo as well. We're on all major things, and yeah, I hope to hear from you guys. Don't forget to get some of the brochures at the back, and we'll be here after the event if you have any questions. With that, I'm going to hand it over to our Executive Vice President of our clubs.
Hi, everyone. As Isabel mentioned, I'm Mark Logwis. I'm the current Executive Vice President of FYLPRO. I also went on the immersion trip back in 2016, and I'm also a co-founder of the Tayo Project. I'm an attorney based in Chicago, and I'm also a proud Michigan and FASA alum. Shout out to some of my former board members in the back and in the front here. Thanks for coming out to support. So before we move on, I'd also like to let you know about another opportunity in our network. So basically, Charlie Mabakiao is a Michigan MBA alum. He's currently involved in the startup scene in the Philippines. And so one of the investors in his company is currently accepting applications for a 12-week incubation program that's based in Manila. It's going to run from June through August this year. And it's designed to support early stage startups with training, mentorship, and networking. They're particularly interested in rising entrepreneurs sitting in rooms like this. So if you have an exciting idea for a product or a service, apply. And if you're accepted, they will send you to the Philippines where you'll get training, mentorship, and networking opportunities. So the program is called Founders Launchpad. And so I'll play just like a really brief clip for more info. Okay, so that's the info there. The deadline is May 5th, and you can find out more at that URL over there. Okay, so now we're moving on to the main event. We are incredibly fortunate to have Professor Ambeth Ocampo joining us tonight to present on one of the topics for which he's renowned in the Philippines and abroad, and that is Dr. José Rizal. a much celebrated figure, oftentimes referred to as the national hero of the Philippines. And also due to the influence of his writings and like the political consciousness that developed around that time during the final years of Spanish colonialism, he is sometimes also referred to as the first Filipino, which of course brings us to the somewhat irreverent title of this event, Rizal, the first Swagapino. So admittedly, the main reason for this, it was to get everybody's attention. That's bigger. But on the other hand, by most accounts, Rizal, who only lived to the age of 35, was not only incredibly accomplished, but he was also a stylish and charming young man with an active romantic life. Whether by his era standards or our own, he most definitely had swag. Professor Ocampo himself acknowledges this in his writings. So back in February, he posted this on Facebook, and I'll just read this. The title is Rizal's Shirtless Selfie. The caption says, "We all know Rizal in an overcoat, but in his youth, long before he became national hero, he took off his shirt, posed in front of a mirror, and drew a selfie." This drawing, reproduced in Austin Craig's Life, Lineage, and Labors of José Rizal, is unlocated and believed to have been lost or destroyed during the 1945 battle for Manila. If Rizal had a smartphone, he would not have drawn this, and Ambeth Ocampo would have no career. So a couple days later, Professor Ocampo's post got picked up by the Philippine Inquirer's lifestyle and entertainment website with a headline that brings us squarely into the current era of youth culture. The R in José Rizal stands for Riz behavior. The article goes on to describe the post and ends with the line, "José Rizal would have made for a good thirst trapper if he had lived in our generation." And so with that, we knew what our hook was going to be for this talk. This evening, we'll have a little fun with Rizal, but we'll also think about all the ways his human side still resonates for those of us living in 2023. Especially for everyone here about to embark on their careers after graduation, juggling side hustles, passion projects, finding work-life balance. What can we learn from a person who wore so many hats, including doctor, poet, novelist, and even sculptor? We are so excited for our special guest to take us on this journey. Ambeth Ocampo is a visiting professor at Michigan Center for Southeast Asian Studies. He is a public historian whose research covers the 19th century Philippines, its art, culture, and the people who figured in the birth of the nation. Professor and former chairman in the Department of History at the Ateneo de Manila University, he writes Looking Back, the longest running editorial page column on history for the Philippine Daily Inquirer, and has published over 35 books, the most recent being Heridas de Rizal, Looking Back 16, and Yaman, History and Heritage in Philippine Money, which was shortlisted for the 2022 National Book Award for History. He served as president of the City College of Manila, president of the Philippine Historical Association, co-chair of the Manila Historical and Heritage Commission, chairman of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, and chairman of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. In another life, he was a Benedictine monk known as Dom Ignacio Maria, OSB. Today, he moderates growing Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube channels. Please join us in welcoming Professor Ambeth Ocampo.
Thank you very much. I just have to switch.
We have the CEO.
Anyway, thanks for coming in. My students are here, so they probably heard half the jokes already. But I had to. Okay, my students are here. They heard the jokes before, but I made sure that some of the slides they have not seen yet. The talk today is about the first Swagapino. Actually, this week I'm giving another talk in New York about Rizal and fake news. And so it's one of the things we want to talk about. What can we learn? What can people in 2023 learn from someone who lived in the last century? And so I think one of the things Rizal grappled with was fake news long before we even invented the term. And speaking of fake news, if you follow me, there used to be 8 fake Ambeth Ocampo pages. I had most of them taken down, but these 2 are still up because it seems they're by real people. So I can't take them down, but obviously that snazzy woman there is not me. And well, that's the thing. So anyway, I hope you can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, or on YouTube. And to make sure you're getting me, you have to look for the ones that have those banners in them. I have a number of books. If you're in Michigan, all my books are in the Hatcher Library. And then one last announcement, if you want to take pictures, I hope you just don't post them because I stole some of the pictures from the net. So I don't want to be answerable. But anyway, my talk will be very, very simple. First, we'll talk about Rizal's continuing relevance. And then we will talk about Rizal and fake news. And then we will end with Rizal and the definition of what heroism is today. If you go to the Philippines and they had a picture of it, the cohort that goes to the Philippines, they always post before or in front of the Rizal monument, which most people know is, they just think it's a monument, but it's actually buried somewhere underneath there. And the monument is actually the kilometer 0 of the Philippines. It's the navel of the nation. So it's the place from which all measurements are in distances are reckoned. So if you go around the country, you will see on the street, you will see a kilometer reading. So when you see that number, you will know how far you are from the Rizal monument. But this monument is important to me because when I was a boy, my father took me to see the monument. He didn't really explain who Rizal was, but I do remember that my father's question then, I think he was just trying to be funny. He asked, why is Rizal wearing a heavy winter coat in the tropics? And it was a question that I didn't think about. And later over the years, it was a question that haunted me. And that's why my book is called Rizal Without the Overcoat. So if people ask now, why does Rizal wear a heavy coat in the tropics? My normal answer is because the monument was made in Switzerland. So you can see here, he needed a coat where he came from. But when they transferred him to Manila, he was still wearing the coat. So the funny part is that although Rizal is the hero who's the most photographed of all, we don't have a photograph of him wearing a coat, rather a Barong Tagalog. And so just like a doll, you can give him any other thing you want. So it started with people in the postal service. So they gave him a barong instead of a coat. And because we were all wondering if he actually wore a Barong Tagalog, I found out that when he was a student in Madrid in 1883, he went to the carnival and he wore his barong. So he brought one with him. And he told his sisters that everyone liked the fabric and they liked the design of my barong. But they said, they liked it so much, he says, I wish I had brought my salakot. A salakot is a Philippine hat. And so this just remained as a little bit of information on my head until I visited the Berlin Ethnographic Museum before the pandemic. And I found out that Rizal had sent all sorts of fabric to this museum in 1888, including a complete male set, a barong, a female set, and they were so exquisite that someone used to say, no straight guy would have chosen all of these things. So again, whether he was straight or a metrosexual, we don't know. But what I always tell people is that his sisters had a clothing store, so they probably did the choosing. But what was interesting in Berlin is that it came with a letter which has never been published before. And the letter in German gives a listing of the stuff that he sent in the box. And in the box, he says, I sent a salakot made of silver and horn. And when you look at it, when you look at it, that salakot, he wrote in German, es gehört mir, which means this is mine. So he actually sent his own salakot to this museum. And it's been in storage for over 100 years. So I wanted to try it on, but the curators were not, well, they were sort of watching me too much, so you have to wear gloves. So I just looked at it and had a picture. But the thing there is that in monuments, Rizal appears in a barong in only one monument, in the Central Luzon State Agricultural College. And I'm told that sometimes they actually give him a real barong, but I guess it gets destroyed in the elements, so they dress him up all the time. But the question we should ask is, what do monuments to Rizal teach us? Because there's a monument to Rizal everywhere, in every town and barrio in the Philippines, and sometimes even abroad. So the monument here on the left, or anyway, the monument here is in China, in Fujian. It's exactly like the one in Manila, except that if you look closely, it has Chinese features. This one is in Madrid, in the place called the Avenida de Filipinas. So he's not just in the Philippines, you find him in other places abroad. So these are the other monuments that were built over the last 100 years. And you actually realize that heroes get represented in monuments, in marble and in bronze. But what happens in the process is that they are actually fossilized, and we have to think about the monuments and what they mean to us. So we have strange monuments like that one of him on top of an ice cream cone. And it looks like it's a playground. So I don't know what the context. I stole this from the net. And this one, I don't know what he's doing. I mean, he resembles one of the figures in a wedding cake, right? He's nice and white, but there's no woman with him. So you can even give him any color you want. Normally he wears black, but sometimes to be different, you can give him gray or red or blue or even pink. Periwinkle would be nice too. But the thing here is that the most fantastic monument to Rizal, because we made him in our image and likeness, is this one. And I was horrified when I saw it. So there are these three naked men carrying Rizal on his two novels, The Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. And of course, when I posted it, it went viral and people were asking which province has this. And someone said, you know, it doesn't look like that anymore. It doesn't really look bad if it's whitewashed. So when it was flesh colored, it looked really good. But when it's just white, it changes its character. So it shows you again how Rizal is presented and represented over time. And because of the monuments, because he's national hero, I like to think that we often forget that he is human. In my Ateneo courses in Manila, at the end of the term, my students always say, you know, what did you learn from the course? I learned that Rizal was human. And I said, who told you he was not? And it's because he has been so, so promoted, but that we actually forget that he is human. But my relationship with him started when I was in high school. In our school, which was Jesuit run, the president of the university, who was related to Rizal, donated Rizal's rosary to the library. So when I was a boy, I saw it. And, you know, it's not Rizal himself, but actually you have something of him. So suddenly he became human to me. So after college, I sought out his relatives. So this elegant lady is the writer Carmen Guerrero Nakpil, who was married to the grandson of Rizal's sister. So she gave me all, and I learned about Rizal not from, I had known about him as a historical person, but hearing it from the relatives gives you a different viewpoint because they see him as they would their grandfather and their great-grandfather. So these are also descendants of Rizal, except the white person in front. Who is Rizal's British biographer. Now, the thing here is, a few years ago, the Lopez Memorial Museum asked me to go over the Rizal manuscripts and annotate them. So this was one of my undergrad students who came to help. So we measured every document, we described it. And when I was looking at it, I was struck by this particular one because it looked like a kiss mark. So I told the curator, do you think this is kiss? And she said, no, it's just a smudge, you're imagining. So because of this, I started to look very closely at each document, not just the text that was in it, but even the smudges that were on it. So like this particular smudge, when I took a picture, so it looks like that, but if you magnify it, it looks like that. So it's a portion of a fingerprint. So he was probably eating greasy stuff. And this, I said, this is the closest we can get to seeing him. And all my other friends said, where are the envelopes? And I said, what do you need the envelopes for? He probably licked the flap, and he says, if we have that, then we can get his DNA and we can replicate him. But I said, we don't have that anymore. We just have these. So again, all these things remind us that our heroes were human too. And they were human before they became heroes. And that's one of the things I think that we have to remember. We always think of heroes as someone who is from another world. We'll never be like that. But you just have to remember that they were humans and they were ordinary people who did extraordinary things. I'd like to think that Rizal's greatest misfortune was to become national hero of the Philippines. They shot him, right? So you don't want to do that. But when you think of heroes, especially in the Philippines, you must ask yourself, why are our heroes always old, male, and dead? When you think about them, someone like this picture came out many years ago, and they thought it was Rizal, but I said, that's just manufacturing put on Rizal's body. But people will believe everything that you put on the net, So my big question there was, do heroes actually still exist today? How can we just learn about them in school? But I don't know. My classmates don't seem to be heroes. And I like to think that heroes today still exist, but we don't recognize them because they look like you and me. They come in a different shape and form. And so in this afternoon, I want you to think, what kind of a Rizal do you want? This 19th century sepia-looking guy, or if we put him in more contemporary terms, he would look like this. So just give him better glasses and nice hair, and he will become, from 1890, become 2023. So what can we learn from this 19th century person? Number one is that he left Ambeth Ocampo with a lot of writing. He left 25 volumes of writing, which nobody reads. No, it's only me. And it pains me to think that he wrote a lot for a nation that does not read him. And people like to quote him without actually reading him or knowing what it is. So there's a lot of fake news that comes up. Fake news is not new. We see this, it is as old as history. And just to give you some example, this is William Howard Taft, who before he became President of the United States and later Supreme Court Chief Justice, served as Governor General of the Philippines. It is not well known that the entertaining in the White House changed because of the Tafts. And the innovations in entertaining, like they never had garden parties before the Tafts came. Everything was indoors. And the Tafts brought garden parties because that was what they learned when they were in Manila. So many of the things that they did, they learned in Manila, they brought back to Washington, and that's how this thing went. Anyway, Taft was all of 300, 400 pounds. And there's this great picture of him on a Carabao. And I used to think this was real until we found another picture of him in the White House on a horse. And there is a story that says that he went up to Baguio. If you go to the Philippines, it's the summer capital. You go up, it's cool. Taft felt Manila was hot, so they built a road at great expense to go up to Baguio. And on one of his inspection trips, he sent a cable to the Secretary of War saying, I went up to the elevation of 5,000 feet on horseback. And the Secretary of War is supposed to have replied, how is horse? Because he was too heavy. So when we were looking at this, I started to compare the two. And when you look very closely, if you look at the creases in the pants in the horse picture, and you look at the Carabao picture, they're exactly the same. You cannot have the same creases on your pants. And you look at the creases on his coat, it's also the same, which means that long before Photoshop was invented, they were already putting people in photographs. And the biggest giveaway that the Carabao picture is Photoshopped from the horse picture is that to guide a horse, you need reins, right? So the reins are connected to the horse's mouth and nose. If you look at the reins in the Carabao picture, it only goes up to the ears, which means that you cannot direct the Carabao where you want to go. So again, it shows you that early in the 20th century, there was already fake news and there was Photoshop. The other thing here is today, because we have everything on the net. If you Google Rizal and you press images, these are all the things that will come out. And because I'm curious, I like to look at all the pictures until Google cannot give me anything else. And one of the pictures that always comes out is this picture of this guy, and they even signed it, José Rizal. The picture comes from the Library of Congress. So they say this is Rizal. And I said, that's not Rizal. They may look as the same, but this is a 20th century picture. They tried to copy the hair, but it's not him. But because it's on the internet, people like it takes on a life of its own. And so we have to be careful about what we are seeing. Rizal published two novels, the Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. And if you go to the Philippines, they have these big copies of what the manuscript looks like. And people think that these are the original covers. If you go to the National Library of the Philippines, you will find out that the only original cover is this one. This one has none, but when they printed it, because it was plain, they put some cover there, and everyone thinks the original has it. Those three priests are the three martyr priests who are called Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora. They were executed in 1872. I don't think they were ever photographed together, so I think this is also Photoshop. Until some years ago, this photo came out on the internet, which shows that they were indeed photographed together, but there were two other blokes there who did not become famous, so they had to be erased. So when you think about it, what is in your history and what is out of it is something that we have to think about all the time. So José Rizal wrote El Filibusterismo and dedicated it to the three priests. So this is the handwritten manuscript to the three priests, Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora. And if you look at it, this is the funny part. Rizal made a mistake. He called Gomez Francisco, but his real name was actually Mariano. And then in the handwritten version, he did not have the date of the execution, but when the book was printed, he put it in. So it's February 28, 1872. And then he supplied the ages of the three priests. And if you look at it, Gomez was supposed to be 85, was actually 73. Burgos, who was 30, was actually 35. And Zamora, who was 35, is actually 37. This is just a historian nitpicking. But what I wanted to realize is that just because he is Rizal does not mean that he is correct all the time. And in the Philippines, they always think Rizal is correct all the time. In 1888, Rizal found himself in the British Library because he had to copy a book. He published in 1899 an annotated version of a book called The Events of the Philippine Islands. The original book is so rare, there are less than 30 copies in the entire universe, and the British Library had two. So Rizal went to copy one of these. And when I was researching, I realized that the reading room of the British Library looked like this in Rizal's time. But when I was a graduate student in London in the 1990s, this is what the great reading room looked like. And it is very important for me because the British Library was the reason why I didn't finish my PhD. My supervisor on my first meeting said, I'm giving you a letter. I want you to go to the British Library and do research. And I said, I don't need to do research because my thesis is on Rizal. He said, so what? I said, my luggage has the 25 volumes of Rizal's writing. So all I have to do is to lock myself in my apartment and I'll write my thesis. Then he says, no, you have to go to the library and you have to do research. And I said, I don't want to do that anymore. Just let me write. And then I said, I know everything about Rizal already. And words of advice from a senior scholar, he says, never be too smug about what you know, because there will always be an obscure German scholar who has written it before you. But you don't know it because he writes in German and he's obscure. So that's why he says, go and humor me today. So I said, okay, give me the letter. And my supervisor says, if you just go in today, and he says, if you don't want to go back after today, it's fine with me. But he says, here's the letter, get your library card, go in the library, sit down and feel intelligent. And when I entered, and this is what it looked like, I sat down and I felt intelligent because I had never seen so many books in my life. And because of this, I started reading. I spent 3 years reading and didn't finish my thesis. So I always tell people that my real education was 3 years reading in the British Library. Unfortunately, the British Library has moved to St. Pancras. If you watched Harry Potter, that's the platform from which the train to Hogwarts goes. So the great reading room is no more. And it's a pity because they moved things out. But when I was studying there, the only scholars are allowed inside, and the public is allowed in only for 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the afternoon. So during these 10 minutes, the crowds come in, they take pictures, the scholars get irritated, we go out and have a coffee. But I noticed that everyone went to a particular table. It was, all the seats are numbered. So this is G7. So one day I asked the librarian, why is everyone going to G7? Who the hell sat there? And I was told Karl Marx sat in G7. So one day I went there, it was empty. So I sat there, claimed it. And while I was warming Marx's seat, and I was so happy with it, I realized if Rizal was here, if they knew where Marx was, they probably know where Rizal was. So I went to the librarian, I said, you know, our national hero came here in 1888. And I want to know where he sat. And then then they went to the records and they actually found José Rizal's application to read in the British Library. And they actually found the place where you will sign, I agree to the regulation. It's like you agree, when you get an app or something, you check that I agree to the conditions. So he signed it and even gave his address. But unfortunately, they could not find the seat. So I was very disappointed. And the librarian just says, well, you know, Mr. Ocampo, you start with seat A1 and tomorrow seat in A2, A3, B1, B2. And he says, in about 6 months, you would have sat on all the seats. And you would have sat on Rizal's seat, but you don't know which one it is. So anyway, fine. So I didn't do that. So I requested the books that Rizal requested. Unfortunately, when he did the Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, in the last page, he actually gave the call number of the book, C32F31. And if you will look here, it's F31. So this was the exact same book that Rizal used 100 years before me. So it looked like that. And so because I was so thrilled to touch it, I opened it right away to look for, maybe he left a note for me inside, there was none. So every day I requested the book, even if I wasn't using it, it would be on my table, I would touch it reverently, I would touch my head in order to get some greatness, and that didn't rub off very much. But I also found out that in 1890, when he published this book, so I went back in 1990, before the pandemic, and I found out that he actually signed the copy in the British Library, but somebody had torn it. So half the page is missing. But just to let you know how important this book is, it's a book that nobody reads. But I'll give you one example. In 1609, Antonio de Morga described the Philippines and said that Filipinos like to eat oxen, beef, pork, fish, etc. And then he said that Filipinos like to eat rotten food. And he says, and they know it is rotten because their food stinks. And when Rizal read this in 1889, he was so incensed that he wrote a very, very long footnote. And all he said in that footnote was that Pinoys don't eat rotten food. That thing is called bagoong. And if you know what bagoong is actually fermented fish or shrimp paste, which means it's rotten or it's rotting. So Morga is correct. But what we see here is that Rizal is explaining, this is what we are. Do not make fun of us for what we eat. And so in doing so, in writing annotations which nobody ever reads, Rizal actually started the first history of the Philippines by a Filipino. And it seems in the entire of insular Southeast Asia, this is the first history that is written from the point of view of a colonized Southeast Asian person. Based on all of his footnotes, he later started to answer fake news, like in Solidaridad in 1890, he published a five-part, very long essay called On the Indolence of the Filipino, because the Spaniards said Pinoys are lazy. And Rizal just said, we're not lazy. We seem to be lazy because it's very hot in the Philippines, so we like to rest. So I said, is that really the way we should look at it? But then he goes with all the sources. So Rizal can be someone we can remember in the age of fake news because he tried to combat fake news. But more importantly, I'd like to think that we should not remember him so much as the hero who gave his life for his country. Sorry, it's being streamed, and I hope I'm not canceled for it, because I don't think, while I think giving your life for your country is something that is laudable, I'd like to think that it is more important to live for your country. And in Rizal's life, his short life, before he died, he actually lived not just for himself, but for other people. And we see this in his Dapitan exile. He was exiled for 4 years in a place called Dapitan. It's in Zamboanga del Norte. To get there today, you need to take a plane from Manila to Zamboanga. And from Zamboanga, you go by car about 20 minutes to Dapitan from Dipolog. So imagine in 1892 what this was like. You take a boat, and then from the boat, you go by land. For somebody who had lived in London, Paris, New York, Madrid, Berlin, being in this godforsaken place was like the end of the universe. And it would have destroyed a normal person, but Rizal was good at making the best of a bad situation. So what did he do? He tried to practice everything that he had learned abroad and brought it back. And what he did here was he did everything to improve life in this sleepy little town, such that he did more for this town than he ever did for his birthplace, Calamba. And that's why Dapitan, even if it does not have the population or the income to be a city, is actually a city simply because Rizal lived there. The first thing he did was to design the town plaza. So when you go there, all these ancient acacia trees were planted by him. So when he got there, this is such a corny place. Why don't we make a park like Europe? So let's plant. So he planted these things, and the acacias have grown. And just to show you what it is like during the American period, when they opened public schools, they would get cuttings from the Dapitan trees, and they planted acacia trees outside American period public schools, so that when school children come inside, they will be reminded this tree came from Rizal's tree in Dapitan. But of course, that nobody remembers that, no, only me. Anyway, so what I did in 2011 was I asked Dapitan to give me 150 cuttings because it was the 150th birthday. So I said, let's plant it in the Ateneo where he studied. And we planted it there, and all the trees died. So they didn't want to be transplanted. But anyway, this is what it looks like now. I mean, I think because we planted it in the smoker's garden, so they died of smoke pollution. But this is Rizal now in the middle, and all those giant trees are there. Rizal was also an amateur cartographer, and he did a relief map of the Philippines. So if you go to the Church of the Pitan, you see it's very ugly, not even painted. And people mistake this thing for just, a garden or landscaping. But if you go up to the church steeple and you look down, you will see that this is the map of Mindanao. And what he wanted to do was to make a whole relief map of the Philippines, but he only finished Mindanao. So that's what he was like. He started many things, but did not finish many things. He was doing some sculpture, and just to show you how good he was, this was his housekeeper. He did a wild boar, which unfortunately was sold at auction and went to Malaysia, so it's not in the Philippines anymore. He did two other sculptures. This is a woman weeding grass. This is probably Oyang too, and this is a more famous one they call Mother's Revenge. So there is a puppy in the crocodile's mouth, and it's the mother trying to save her puppy. And this one, people always say it's a woman washing clothes. But if you read the text under, it says buglay, which is the Visayan word for weeding. So even in the way we remember it, we forget. In the Rizal family, they have this little bust, which is now in San Francisco. It's the bust of Rizal's lover, Josephine Bracken. So we see her sort of in half undressed. Anyway, to see his more scholarly works, he did dictionaries while he was in the PITA. He did an a Tagalog-English dictionary, English-Tagalog dictionary. And unfortunately, he only got to letter A. And then when you look at it, look, it says, I abandoned my house. It says, pinababayaan ko ang aking bahay. No? Pinaligtan. So, I mean, his mind was very, very active. No? Another thing that he did, and this is the first psychological essay ever written by a Filipino, it's on the cure of the bewitched. He was a medical doctor. And when people came to him, he would ask, what are you sick of? And they would say, I was bewitched by the neighbor. Kinulam ako ng kapitbahay. Of course, there's no bewitching there. So he started to interview all the herbolarios and mangkukulams, and he did this little drawing about people who were afflicted by witchcraft. So this one, the woman says, ay ina, mamamatay ako. And the little girl says, wag po kayo matakot. Ako man ay bata, ako'y bantog na hilot. So don't be scared. Even if I'm a little girl, I know how to. What's hilot? How to heal. And as you can see, you see the interior of the hilot's house. There are religious paintings on top. And then here on top of the table is the donation box. No? So sa hilot. So you put your donation there. This one is a girl afflicted with lice. And so she says, itong puto, the lice that was planted in me is growing so much. And the mother says, I'm going to, get rid of them. If you grow up in the Philippines during summer, all the little kids get lice. And we were all told that if you don't remove the lice from your hair, the lice will fly off and bring you on the hair and drop you in Mayon volcano. So you would have to endure the licing, which was very painful. This one, I don't know what it is. We have someone who probably understands Cebuano or Bisaya. The girl points at the man and says, kaengat kayo kalbo, you're bald. And then the guy answers, huga. Does that make sense to you? It doesn't make sense to me. And this last one is a woman doubled up in pain, and she says, ako'y nalalata kung ano pa man ang nasa loob aswang. So there's a monster growing inside her. So Rizal wrote this and later said, there's no such thing as witchcraft. This is just auto-suggestion. So don't believe it. But even if he was not a believer, he actually made a fortune-telling game, which the family has actually sold as a set. It's called Sibila Kumana. It comes with wooden tops with numbers. So you spin the top and then you look at the number. There's a little book that has your fortune. And the fortune there is so amazing. There were things like, the world will end, but there will always be fools, which is something that is true. And this one I like. When I spin the top, it said to me that success would depend on my cooking. And this one was nice. One of my friends spinned the top, and his future came out that the best day of your life will be a night. So sometimes you can see he also has a sense of humor. So the point here is Rizal did many things. No? So he practiced general medicine. There were people who had toothache. So we have letters to his family. Can you send me dental instruments because I have to pull out teeth? So he had an illegal practice of dentistry because he was the only doctor there. He researched on folk medicine. And then he said, people here live by the sea, but they don't know how to use fish nets. They're all idiots. So he told his family, send me some fish nets here and I'll teach them how to fish. So they send him the nets. And the next month, you see the letter says, can you send a fisherman too? Because I don't know how to use the net. So they sent a fisherman and they learned how to use net. The people there had never tasted real bread, fluffy bread. So he asked for flour and yeast, and he opened the first hot pandesal store. He actually built the water system for the Pitan. And this is quite interesting. No? He actually learned Visayan and whatever else that was there. He collected specimens, and these specimens are still in a little town in Germany called Dresden. So they were all preserved in alcohol. No? Butterfly shells, snakes, reptiles, he drew types of fish, and such that based on what he sent, the scientific name of this winged lizard is called Draco Rizali because it has his name, and that's a frog, which is the Rhacophorus rizali, and this bug called the Apogonia rizali. And even if he's long dead, they even named a shell after him. When I went to the museum some years ago, they showed me the ethnographic objects that he had sent. And when I looked in the back, one of them actually said Dr. Rizal, the Pitan. He also was paid in kind. Most of his patients could not pay in cash. So they paid him with chicken, vegetable, egg. And one day someone gave him some bits of stone, and he looked at it and he says, what is this? And the person said, these are lightning teeth. And he says, what are lightning teeth? He says, when lightning strikes the ground, it will bite into the earth. And when it goes back to the sky, sometimes its teeth remain. And Rizal looked at it and said, you idiot, this is not lightning teeth. These are stone tools of our ancestors. Where did you find it? And then he says, they brought him there. So he drew this treasure map to Lumanao. And so we actually have the treasure map. And he dug there. And when he dug there, he found not more lightning teeth. He found stone tools, gold jewelry, and some pottery. So because of this, he is considered, even if he's not a trained archaeologist, he's considered the father of Philippine archaeology. I have gone to the Pitan to look for this bloody treasure, and I've never found it. The other thing was that Rizal decided to do the waterworks. So how to bring water through the entire town. And in his estate, and this is very sad, Rizal built a dam. He had a 18-hectare estate, which he bought with the winnings from lotto money. Every week of his life, he bought lotto tickets. And when he was a prisoner in the Pitan, he won the second prize lotto. But unfortunately for Rizal, he never bought the entire ticket. So he shared the ticket with the governor of the Pitan, who was in charge of imprisoning him. So they were both happy. Anyway, he bought the property and he built a dam. And from this dam, he put the bust of the governor of the Pitan, and then the dam collected the rainwater, and they were connected with bamboo tubing. So the entire estate had running water. But when I went to the Pitan some years ago, I looked at this. This is what it looks like today. It's now covered in cement. But years ago, I asked for a brush, and when I cleaned it, what I found was there were names on the wall. So his students like Joe, Leo, Dalpin, they actually signed their names on the side of the dam when it was still wet. So we have the names Mateo, Tom, Roman, Lucas, Leo, Dalpin, Aniceto. Adolfo, Joe Acenero, and Elum. I think his name was Elumbre. And I told them to take care of it. And how did the government take care of it? They covered it with cement. So it's now gone. So that's what it looks like. That's what it looks like with my last trip. So, and it's irreversible. We will never, ever get to find it again. But because Rizal wrote a lot, we have an idea of what his regular day was like. So he tells you, and you know, because he had a school, the houses are built in different geometric shapes. So I have a square house, a hexagonal house, and an octagonal house. That's how obsessive compulsive he is. It's all made of bamboo, wood, and pine. And the square one, my mother, my sister, and a nephew live. So this is the square house. And then this is the octagonal house. His boys, meaning his students, would live there. And here, under the house, he would teach them arithmetic, Spanish, and English. And now and then a patient came, and this is where he worked with them. And it was funny, he says, I have many fruit trees, and he gives the names of the trees: mangoes, lanzones, guyabano, nangka. I have rabbits, dogs, and cats. And he hated the monkeys in the forest because they stole his fruit. So he says, when I hear a monkey, I reach for my gun. And there was another letter like, the neighbors were noisy. I reached for my gun. So I mean, it's not very neighborly, no? But that's what he was like. Anyway, there's this rock here that people go up to. And this rock is supposed to be where he and his lover, Josephine Bracken, would have a tryst. It's a very uncomfortable place for a tryst, believe me. So anyway, but from this rock, you can see the beach. And what is amazing about this place is that, and I took, when you go to the Pitan today, they don't have a Jollibee, they don't have a Shoemart Mall. And so when you look at the vista, this is the same vista that Rizal saw from 1892 to 1896. It's still unspoiled. And you can see that from the Miretiro rock where he's supposed to have had, you know, afternoon trysts. Anyway, he says that he wakes up early, 5 a.m. I don't wake up early because I go on Netflix binges and stay up till noon. Then he visits his feed, feeds the chickens, and then he wakes up the folks. And then after that, 7:30, they have breakfast. And look at the breakfast. It's not rice. It's pastry, tea, cheese. Now, very, very Western. Then he treats the poor patients who cannot pay. And then he dresses up and goes to town in a baroto, which is a banca. And he treats patients in town. Then he returns at 12, takes lunch. And of course, he teaches the boys until 4. Then he spends farming, he reads, and that's basically what his normal day is like. I'd like to think that for all the things that Rizal is to be remembered for, his most lasting influence is actually in the idea of education. So this is where he taught the boys. He sat in a hammock and the boys did things. Rizal just said that I would establish a school and this is my biggest aspiration. He wrote out the prospectus for a school, which he called the Modern College. He gave the different subjects they were studying, and he even gives the uniform. And this is the fun, my students always see the craziest things. The uniform consists of 12 shirts, 12 white boxers, 4 interior clothes, 6 striped shirts, 6 colored pants, 24 hankies, 24 socks, and a belt, leather belt, and 2 pairs of shoes and boots. When my students look at it, they ask, the first question was, why are there 24 hankies, 24 socks, and only 12 boxers? I said, maybe you wear them twice, no? Or you turn them around. So I don't know, I never found the answer why there are less boxers than socks. But anyway, this is the order of classes in his school. And if I had a child, I wouldn't send him here because the poor child, look, they wake up at 5:30 in the morning. And what do? They practice Swedish gymnastics, whatever that is. And my friend Lenoy Claudio when I looked it up on the internet, Swedish gymnastics is a sort of roll around in the ground. No, it's supposed to be exercise, but it's very fun. You watch it, they're rolling down hills. No, that's what it is. And then 6:30 to 8, they study in a study room. 8 to 10, they have classes, which is real lectures. 10 to 10:30, they sort of walk around to loosen up. 10:30 to 11, they have recreation, they play, they have horseback riding, they have swimming, and they have fencing on alternate days. Then 11 to 12, study period again. 12 to 12:45, lunch. 12:45 to 1:15, they have recreation again, music and drawing. 1:15 to 3 o'clock. It's always study period. Study period meaning you study by yourself. There's no lectures. And then, where are we? 3 to 5, they have class. 5 to 5:15, merienda. 5:15 to 5:45, gym again and athletics. 5:45 to 6:15, recreation. 6:15 to 8, study. 8 to 8:30, dinner. And then look, 8:30 to 9:30, they had parlor games, social games, dancing, and music. So he wanted to create the perfect boy. You not only you have to know how to draw, you have to know how to sing, you have to know how to dance. Then 9:30 to 5:30, you sleep. So when I looked at it, in the Pitan, they actually have Rizal's desk. It's just a piece of wood, and then that was his blackboard. So he wrote with charcoal. And when I looked at it, on the desk were calling cards from his medical practice in Hong Kong. So he brought them. He never used them again. So why did he bring them to the Pitan? Almost all the calling cards have words in the back. So he used them as cards. Read this: cap table, Czechoslovakia. No, it becomes more complicated. But you see here, instead of teaching them Spanish, he taught them English. So when the Americans arrived in the 1900s, they were surprised in this little town in Mindanao, there were English-speaking boys, because Rizal felt that America would play a great role in the early 20th century, and he was correct about it. So here we see a letter to his nephew, Mauricio, who he called Morris. And he says in Spanish, you study well because those people who don't study will receive coscorones. So I asked one of Rizal's grandnieces, Lola, what is a coscorones? And she made a fist. And then with her knuckles, she knocked me on the head. This is what happens to you if you don't study. So this is actually a threat. So he's threatening the boy. If you don't study, I will coscorones you. And then he says, I wish for you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Then he's teaching him English. Felices Pascuas, and English, Merry Christmas. Wrong spelling, Christmas. Then Feliz Año Nuevo, Happy New Year. Then he says, Maurice, you must be a good boy, your uncle Rizal. So again, no, wrong spelling. It's not that the way you should teach your young nephew, but he's threatening him with coscorones. Anyway, so what is Happy New Year, no, Año Nuevo? So the thing here is Rizal made many mistakes. His sisters sent their children to be tutored by him. And there's one wonderful letter when Rizal's sister complained, what are you doing to my two sons? And Rizal asked why. And she says, you gave one son a bolo, which is a bladed weapon. The other son, you gave a book. What do you want my son to be, a farmer? And Rizal answered very nicely. He says, we cannot all become doctors and lawyers. Some people have to work the land. And he says, I looked at your sons. One likes to plant, so I gave him the bolo. The other one's always in the house reading, so I gave him the book. So you find out what the child is good at, and instead of forcing him to do something else, you build on what his strengths are. I found out from one of the relatives that the entrance exam for Rizal's school was not an IQ test. The entrance exam for Rizal's school is that the parents will bring the boy to Rizal late afternoon, around 4 or 5, around dusk. And Rizal will take the boy, you leave the parents there, and he'll take the boy into the woods for a walk. I wouldn't allow my child to go with a stranger into the woods in the dark. But anyway, they allow him to do it because he's José Rizal. So they go into the woods, they sit down, and Rizal sort of interviews the boy. He's carrying something, a hat, a cane, whatever. Then they walk back. When they walk back to Rizal's house, it's already dark. And then Rizal will turn around and, oh, remember where we sat? I forgot my hat. Can you go back and get it? And when the boy looks, it's already dark. If the boy doesn't go, you flunk, you're not admitted. But if the boy goes into the dark forest, the other boys who were already, it's like hazy. The other boys who were there will make strange sounds, whoa, like so. Usually the boy will come running back with the thing Rizal brought back. And when he comes back, Rizal is standing with all the other boys and he will say, it is not enough to have a good head or to have an intellect. You must have courage, you must have heart. Welcome to our school. So again, that's something that will not work today. But it shows you what the baby was like. So to end, I mean, this were just to give you a glimpse of what it is. But I like to think that when we think of heroes, we have to look back at the Philippine word for a hero. If you look at hero on Google in English, he's somebody who's admired, has outstanding qualities. A hero can be a submarine sandwich. That's what I saw. But when you look at the word hero in Tagalog, it says bayani. And a bayani can be a patriot, makabayan. He has extraordinary strength. He's like a god. He does something noble. It's dakila. He's victorious, mamayani, to prevail. He's also the leading man in a play. But I found in one of the old Spanish dictionaries that a bayani is described as somebody who volunteers or does free service towards a cooperative task. So in the time when people lived in nipa huts, if you're moving your house, you tell your neighbors, I'm going to move to the next town. Your neighbors will carry your house to the next town, and they call this bayanihan. So it was heroism, it was doing a service for free for a bigger task. So therefore, a hero or a bayani is not somebody who teaches boys and does great things or gets shot in the back for writing 2 novels that nobody read. A hero is somebody who does something bigger than himself. Does something for the nation. And therefore, I'd like to think that to know Rizal is to know what it is to be Filipino. And I invite you to read his novels, to see what a wonderful writer he is, and to see what he was like as a person. I will end today with a letter that he wrote to his little nephew, Freding. Freding was 9 years old. And this was the letter of advice that Rizal was giving his nephew. He was telling him to study, and not only to study, but to meditate and reflect on what you are studying. And then he says, life is very serious. And he says, only those with intelligence go through life worthily, meaning if you're stupid, you're not worth living. It's not a very nice thing to think about. But he actually said, and he has a very pessimistic view of people. He says, to live is to be among men, and to be among men is to struggle. And the struggle is to endure many things with a smile on your lips and with tears in your heart, meaning many things in life don't go the way that you want them to go. And then he says, in the battlefield of life, man has no greater weapon than his intellect and his heart. And so he tells his nephew that the nephew should sharpen these weapons. So he says, sharpen and perfect and polish your mind and fortify and educate your heart. And this is what we often forget when we come to university. We come to get our degrees and we only develop this. And we often forget to develop the heart. I teach in the Ateneo and UP, which I think is the upper 5% of the country. And I always tell my students, when you graduate, you are the upper 5% of the Philippines that will oppress the other 95% because of the knowledge that you got. And that is why it is important not just to develop head, but also to develop heart. And with this, I'd like to think that with some idea of what Rizal is like, that you think of him as a Swagapino or whatever you want to call him, but think of Rizal as somebody who embodies what it is to be Filipino. And unfortunately, many of us do not live to that ideal, but he shows us the way, and I hope you will find the way with him too. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you, Professor Ocampo. We do still have quite a bit of time. Maybe if people have questions, just have a little casual conversation.
Are there any questions, any comments? Yes, please. All very quiet. Anyone? Yes, please.
Were there other historians in the Philippines at the time around Rizal's time that could have written a history of the Philippines?
Were there other historians? Yes, there was one who Rizal did not like. And we actually have a letter where Rizal describes him as, the guy's name was Pedro Paterno. And he says, Pedro Paterno is, he wrote in German, and then you'll see a squiggle that goes that way. And then he says, and you know what he is? He's more, and then the squiggle goes that way. Paterno also tried to write Philippine history, but he invented a lot of it. Like he says strange things like, the Garden of Eden was in the East. And he thinks that the Garden of Eden was in the Philippines, and the forbidden fruit that Adam and Eve ate from was not a delicious red apple, but was a luscious yellow Philippine mango. So it's this kind of strange history that was being written. So Rizal was not the only one, but he was the one who was more scholarly than the rest. So he wasn't alone. And but again, I guess because he is national hero, he's the only one we remember. Yes, anything else you want to ask? Yes, please.
You keep mentioning that he was educating boys and the boys did this here or they studied here. So it makes me wonder, did he ever have women or girl students? And what do you think what do you think he thinks about educating them?
Yeah, he grew up in he grew up in schools that were all boys. So probably that was the template. But you must remember that he grew up in a house with 9 sisters and a very strong mother. And all of them went to school. That was the strange thing, that he did not think of educating the girls. But there is a letter that he wrote to the young women of Malolos. It's a group of women who asked the Governor General for permission to open a school for Spanish because they wanted to learn Spanish and the parish priest wouldn't allow them. So he wrote in support of them and said that women should actually develop their minds aside from just learning to take care of the home. And Rizal has a wonderful line in that essay saying something like, next to God, a mother is everything to anyone who lives. So he thought about it, but unfortunately he did not think of educating the girls in the school. Yes, anything else? Yes,
I'm
please.
just wondering why you think José Rizal is like the national hero, when in fact there's also like other heroes, like Filipino heroes, such as like Apolinario and Ambeth and all those people also like
Yeah, well, actually, Rizal is just one of many national heroes, and it's unfortunate that there's only space in the monument for one person. There is the ridiculous story that's making the rounds that says that the Americans chose Rizal to be the national hero because he was a pacifist and not a revolutionary, which is a great disservice to him because they actually distorted what he was, and Rizal actually felt that people should first educate themselves and fight for their rights. And he actually says that if all peaceful means do not work out, then you can go into armed revolt. So that part of his story is gone. But in 1998, Fidel Ramos discovered that we do not have a law that declared Rizal a national hero. So Ramos said, why don't we? So he formed a committee of historians. I was one of them that would study the issue, and we would make a recommendation on what to do. Our recommendation was there are many heroes. There are heroes who are national. There are heroes who are for certain regions, but the prime national hero is actually Rizal. And when we realized the political implications of it, that if one, you cannot legislate a hero. So if we declare Rizal, then there will be problems. So Ramos got the recommendation and shelved it. But if you Google it, you will find what the committee actually recommended. So we just felt that, for me personally, I'd like to think that all the other heroes of the 19th century, Mabini, Bonifacio, Aguinaldo, they were all inspired by Rizal. And for me, Rizal is a hero not because he fought with a gun or a bolo, but rather he imagined the nation even before it was there. He imagined what it was to be Filipino and defined what it was to be Filipino. And unfortunately, we have not lived up to his ideals. That's basically it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, please.
So when I was your student back in 2018, you mentioned that Rizal also wrote a lot of other works besides the Modi and the Feeling. And I was just wondering if there's been any development of progress in terms of finding more unpublished or unfinished stories since then.
Okay. I made my career because I found the drafts of a third novel after El Filibusterismo. It's one of those funny things about life that the drafts have been in the library for the longest time, but nobody saw it because a librarian who probably didn't read Spanish mislabeled the cover. So she put on it the cover says on the book, it says Borrador de Noli Me Tangere, the drafts of the Noli Me Tangere. So all the scholars before me, the drafts of the Noli, it's not important, so they throw it back into the vault. And it was only in 1987 when I was studying this, I wanted to write a paper on the handwritten version until it became printed. And when I looked at these 245 pages, when I was on page 150, if this is the draft of the Noli Me Tangere, how come the characters are different? And that's when I realized he had started another novel, but unfortunately didn't finish it. And why is this important? Because his two novels were in Spanish, but this one he started in Tagalog because he felt that nobody read him in Spanish. So he wanted to write in the language of his people. But because he was more comfortable in Spanish, after writing 245 pages, he decided, to heck with it, I'll write again in Spanish. So he started writing again, and he finished about 4 chapters, and he didn't finish. But this is one of about 8 drafts for novels that he started. And I'd like to think there are more things that are waiting around, lying in the archive or in the library to let us see what it's like. No, just to give you an idea of what he was writing. He had one, it's a very short novel about a chick that hatches out of an egg. So the chick comes out of an egg and sees the hen. And the chick asks the great existential question, what is man? And the answer to the great existential question is, the hen says, a man is a chicken that is bigger than you. And it ends there. So that's novel, unfinished novel number 8. There's another novel which is almost 1 chapter. It's called Swan's Animals. It's about a farmhand who can understand the language of animals. So he goes up into a tree and listens to the animals talk. And when they talk, he realizes that the animals have their own social structure. And at the head of the social structure was the pig called Bocho. And when you look at it, you read this novel, which is very funny. It reminds you of George Orwell's Animal Farm. But Rizal had written it decades before Orwell did it, but unfortunately Rizal did not finish the novel. So there are many things lying around, and Unfortunately, the stuff is in a vault, and we'd like to think there would be more, but even the stuff that he has already published is not really being read. And I'm sure that if we read things again, we will find new insights in what is old. I wish I had a better answer. That's it. One or two last questions before we have merienda or something. Yes, please.
If nobody's gonna ask, I'll ask one more, and I'm very curious about this. I know that you're very passionate about studying Rizal. If he was here today and alive, what would be your question?
Never thought of that. I mean, I don't think of it simply because I'd like to think that I know Rizal better than he knows himself. Because I've read the entire 25 volumes. But the thing that bothers me is that while Rizal left us with 25 volumes of writing, everyone says, this is enough for me to write for the next 20 years. But in the back of my mind, it has always bothered me that what were the things that he did not write? What were the notebooks that he destroyed? Sometimes he would write in code, stupidly thinking nobody can read the code. Now we can read everything he wrote, even the secrets. So the point is, while he left us with stuff, he left us with stuff he wanted Ambeth Ocampo to read. And he kept the other things. So somewhere, somehow, we will find the other stuff that he didn't want us to. I mean, like, even in his pictures, he only chose and distributed the pictures where he, I mean, it's like today, you take a selfie, oh, my eyes are closed, delete. The nice thing, you have a nice picture, post it, right? But, and Rizal was like that. Even in his pictures, he was editing. So the pictures that are not very nice, he hid, but he didn't throw them. So we have all the ugly pictures. So the point here is he left us with a curated view of what he wanted or what he imagined himself to be. So that is my question, actually. What is the real result that I will never know of, even if I have the 25 volumes of his writing? But to spoil everyone's fun, they always ask me, you know, if you had dinner and could invite someone from the past, who would you invite? And they always think I'd invite Rizal. And my answer from Philippine history is it's not really Rizal. There are other heroes that I find more interesting, one of them being Apolinario Mabini, who's not very well known. I like to meet the Luna brothers, both of whom were murdered because of their temperament, especially one Luna the painter, greatest Filipino painter, national hero of the Philippines. But the story that is always pushed under the rug is that he murdered his wife and his mother-in-law, which is a real story in itself. And I have to find out why that murder happened and what drove him to do the things that he did. But that's basically it. I'll have no questions for him, but I guess Rizal talks, then I will find the question. That is difficult. Okay, one last question. Anyone? There's no more. We have someone who's related to the former director of the National Library, Teodoro Calao, studying here now. He was the guy who first put all of Rizal's correspondence together. And I was surprised because there were 13 letters from a Belgian woman that were in the library but were not included in the collection of letters, because I think Calao felt that these were too racy for printing. Only one letter has survived, and it survived because it's in the Calao collection. So I wondered why it was in his collection. But the letter is like, it's a woman writing to Rizal and saying, Rizal is away. I think he was visiting, and the woman says, where are you? You know, I miss you so much. My shoes are worn out because I run to the post box 20 times a day to see if you have written me. And then he says, my body pines for you. And then there's this strange line that says, where are you, you naughty little boy? Why don't you come home to auntie so we can play? And when I read this, why is he calling Rizal a naughty little boy? who is auntie and what kind of games will they play? So maybe that's just me. There might be a more romantic reason for that, but those are the things that make for interesting history. And those letters I've seen from a footnote. I knew they existed, and the big question is how come they were never printed? And all we have is the naughty little boy letter. So I said the other 11 must be worse than they. Again, that's how research goes through. Anyway, anything else? One last before we go? Going,
I'll
guys.
say one. So for those of us here who don't become professional historians, what can we do in our kind of everyday lives to support the work of historians like yourself and preserve, historical memories?
Well, one I think is to read history. Just like Rizal, I mean, you guys are lucky. If you were studying in the Philippines, you would have been forced to read Rizal's novels. And I have to admit that when I was in college, I read the comic book version just to pass the exam. But and I only read Rizal when I became a teacher. My first job was being a teacher for undergrad Philippine history, and when I taught this, obviously I was teaching the course in the slot that none of the professors liked. It was a 7 a.m. class, and I had no choice because I had no job. So and who goes to a 7 a.m. class? Only the computer science nerds, right? So so when I taught that class, I was very nice. I was reading the Noli. I was 5 chapters ahead of my students. And one day we're discussing, say, chapter 15, and in the back, one of the students raises his hand and says, "Sir, I have a problem with chapter 25. And my knee started to buckle. I asked about 25. It's only on 15. And because I learned that early, the teachers have to be 3 steps ahead of the students. So what I said was, that's a wonderful question, but it's not related to our lesson today. So I will answer you at the next meeting. And this was a Thursday. It was Tuesday, Thursday class. So after the class that weekend, I had to read the novel all the way to the end because my life depended on it. And when I read it, because my life depended on it, it was the first time that I realized what a wonderful writer Rizal was. And it is just unfortunate that we always think of him as national hero. So when we read the novels, we're looking for nationalistic things, patriotic things, but they have to be enjoyed as novels first. It is one of my perverse dreams to think that my students will be reading the Noli in Boracay, sunning in the beach. But that may or may not happen. But today, as you know, there was a very popular teleserye called Maria Clara at Ibarra. It's about a 21st century girl who's thrown back into the time of Rizal. And there was this big row because people were saying, "Why are you doing that to the novels? No, it's not the real Noli." They're just having fun. Just let them have the fun. And because of this crazy telenovela about time travel, more people started to read the novel on their own and discovered and rediscovered Rizal for what he is. So you can order it online. There are Penguin translations of Rizal. Try it out, especially the first novel, and you'll see, just how funny he is, and think about all the nationalistic things later. So what's the advice? It's actually to read, and as Rizal says, reflect on what you are reading, because what you read really becomes what you are and what you will be in the future. Thank you.
So we have space for another 15 minutes, so we'll just be around until next week. Feel free to hang out. Yeah.